On the Patriots, so we're a little bit behind. Now, just let you know, today is going to be very lecture heavy simply because we have to get through the rest of the Revolutionary War. So I know that we're all a little full and a little tired after lunch, but try really hard to stay awake. We will take a little break in the middle to kind of break it up just a little bit to get your wiggles out, but then we'll get going, okay? So we just finished the Loyalists. So remember, the Loyalists are loyal to what country? England, okay? So the Patriots, otherwise known as the Yankees, are going to be loyal to the American cause, okay? So this is going to be kind of what their major goals are. So with your pen, what I would write on the second bullet, this is the reasons of really why they're going to revolt. So with the things that I would write number 1, rights of British subjects, just do a little number 1 so you know what their 3 major ideas are. Number 2, the rights of the individual. Number 3, traditions of self-rule or local traditions of self-rule. And then 4, the ideas of the Enlightenment. This is really where they get their inspiration of why we should become patriots and why we should rebel against the British government. Oops. Now, these Patriots and Yankees, 3 is local traditions of self-rule, and 4 is ideas of the Enlightenment. Now, these are the blue coats, by the way, so if you ever see a blue picture or blue uniforms, that's going to be the British. Philosophical reasons of why they wanted to. So this is going to be your number 3 cause of the American Revolution. So we're writing down, again, in no particular order, number 3, philosophical reasoning of the Patriot cause. Okay? These are reasons why they wanted you to be able to go and join and why we should start the Patriot cause. So if you will highlight the words foreign philosophers, John Locke, and Benjamin Franklin. Okay? So basically, foreign influencers from Greece and from Rome, these philosophers are really going to inspire the American colonists. Also, in contrast, we have John Locke. This is the idea that says life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, which we then changed to pursuit of happiness. And then we have Benjamin Franklin, who's going to give us probably one of the most famous pictures in American history, which is the join or die. You've probably seen this before, right? So this is going to be his propaganda of why we should come together. So if you don't know about snakes, snakes have a bunch of hearts. And if you don't know about, if you never dissected a worm or something like that, if you take a worm or a snake and you cut it up into pieces, as long as there's one heart in each of the sections, it will actually continue to live for about 5 to 6 hours. So simply because of the beating heart, it doesn't need a brain, it will keep beating. So with a snake, you can cut it apart and it will still live, but just barely, and then eventually it will die. That is the idea here. Yes, you have the snakes. These are going to be the major important, what he considers the important states in America. Yeah, they could live apart and cut up into little pieces, but they're going to struggle and wilt and eventually die. But instead, if the entire thing comes together and joins as one giant American snake, it will be able to live and thrive as a new nation. That's his idea here of his propaganda. Now, getting into Republicanism. Okay, Republicanism is the idea, if you want to go ahead and highlight, where it says, people determine how and by whom they would be governed. This is basically the idea of power to the people. You get to choose where your government is going to be and who your government is going to be. So, for example, right now our president is Donald Trump, right? If you don't know, every 4 years we elect a president. Now, in between those, we have what we call midterm elections. Those are every 2 years, and they often give us an indication of whether or not people like or dislike the current president. So, for example, in Obama's first presidency, his first 4 years, we continue to have a Democratic-controlled Congress, meaning we had more Democrats in Congress than Republicans. On the opposite side, on his second term, it flipped. People weren't as happy with the second term, and they chose to have Republicans instead. Right now we're having a major turn towards more Democrats in Congress in this midterm election coming up. We won't know for sure until November. But also we have a change in individual beliefs. So you don't have to always be red states, and you don't always have to be blue states. For example, there is a currently extremely red state over near the East Coast that just barely are going to elect, so it's highly likely they're going to win. It would be the first transgender person to be a congressperson. That is a huge deal for a traditionally Republican state to, first off, elect a Democrat, and second off, elect somebody who's transgender. So things can switch. That's the idea here. Now, you can't think of the word Republicanism as the word Republican, because the word Republican, if you don't know, we'll actually learn in this class, flip-flops every 12 years or so of its meaning. It doesn't mean its modern meaning until 1980. So in the 1950s, a Republican is actually a Democrat. And in the 1930s, a Republican is actually a Democrat. And then it flip-flops until the modern day. And it'll be really fun to learn about. You're going to hate it. But don't worry, it's not on the AP exam, because it's very confusing, the American political system. So anyways, moving on. Wrong one. So impressment is going to be your number 4 cause of the American Revolution. It is actually a very easy cause to be able to remember, because you only have to highlight one thing, and you'll always remember it from now on, which is going to be the word sailors. Okay? All you have to do is highlight the word sailors, and you will be able to remember what this word and term means. So, with the sailors, let's explain what impressment is. So we know that the British Navy is constantly fighting over and over again to be able to have control of the seas. To do that, they need a very large navy. Now, what they decide to do is they pass a law that says that if the British Navy needs more people, that they will actually be allowed to go and take a ship, that's an American ship, that's also called commandeering. They take the ship, and you are now part of the English Navy, and you have no choice. You're not asked, hey, do you want to join our Navy? You're told you are now part of the United States Navy, and this angers people. No other of the colonies are allowed to do this. You can't steal an English boat. It's only the American colonies. America starts to feel like they're being treated far more unfairly compared to everybody else. So, heading in towards our resistance. Okay? On this paper, this is going to be the start of kind of our movement towards revolution. If you will highlight upper class New Yorkers, and then highlight writing articles against the taxes. So, we know that basically in this time period, the rich and the wealthy are going to be the only ones that are going to know how to be able to read and write. So they are going to begin to write civil articles, pamphlets, books, saying we need to start an American Revolution. If you will also star the Sons of Liberty, this is going to be that underground resistance league that is going to attempt to fight the British. They're going to do anything they can, whether it resorts to violence or illegal or possibly killing somebody, in order to be able to achieve what they want. Now, the Stamp Act kind of begins the downturns towards violence. So, with the Stamp Act, right, we know this. We know that they're going to put stamps on all your papers, right? Now they're going to put stamps on all your different products, and it's going to anger people. This is a great propaganda where it has the stamp, and it says that it is the fatal stamp of beginning the American Revolution. Now, violence is going to begin to erupt because of this. We're going to have people that are going to burn down buildings, people that are going to tar and feather, that are going to end up killing people, anything they can to start the American Revolution. Now, 2 years ago, it says last year's DBQ, but 2 years ago, there was a DBQ on the American Revolution. This was one of the sources on that DBQ. The vast majority of students got this wrong because they said that it was about the Tea Act, because it's a teapot. What does it say on the teapot?
No.
Stamp Act. So please read the sources, because almost everybody wrote that this was in response to the Tea Act. Make sure you read the source, because it actually says no Stamp Act on top of it, right? So just being able to read it. But anyways, so moving on to kind of a little bit of our violence happening here. So this is going to be especially in those port cities, in particular Boston. So if you want to write next to all this violence erupts and stuff, this is going to be in Boston. Now, why? It's a port city, right? Port cities are going to receive the most amount of taxes because they're going to be the ones that are going to import and export so much. So, fearing that Boston is going to uprise, the British Army is going to go and surround the entire city with the army. Nobody comes in, nobody comes out. You are now under military control. This angers and frustrates people. So what's going to happen is we're going to have our next cause of the American Revolution, which is going to be the Boston Massacre. So this is going to be number 5. Pablo, will you be able to see if I turn off the lights? Or do you want me to keep them on?
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. If you can't see, just let me know. I just want to turn this off so we can be able to see a little bit better the engraving that you guys all did for your homework. Okay? Now the Boston Massacre. This picture looks a little bit different than what you guys did for your homework, right?
Yeah.
Okay? Does it seem pretty equal-sided on both sides of who's at fault here? Yeah, everyone's fighting each other, right? Yeah. Yeah, a lot more unbiased, right? So what happens with the Boston Massacre? So in Boston, there's anger and there's frustration, and people are upset about this siege. So you have all these military men walking around, all these colonists, and everyone's bringing their guns wherever they walk. It's like kind of one of those standoffs for several weeks. Finally, in front of one of these houses, there begins to be a brawl or a fight. Now, it starts with just pushing and shoving, maybe a punch or two. It escalates when the colonists begin to throw snowballs at the soldiers. And you think, oh, that's adorable, a snowball fight. Those snowballs had sharp rocks in them. They had particularly sharpened on purpose. So they begin to pummel the British soldiers with all these rock snowballs. Somehow, in the middle of all this, a shot rings out. Fighting begins. 4 colonists are going to die. Most famously, the first one are going to be Crispus Attucks, which is going to be an African-American former slave. He probably becomes the first famous slave, in my opinion, of the time period and of American history, because he was the first to die during the Boston Massacre. Now, the reality is, both sides fought, but as you guys know from your homework, is that what they said in the newspapers? Nope. They made it very clear of what they felt like actually happened. Now, first off, this is an engraving. It's important to know that this is not a painting. An engraving is where they take a sheet of metal or a stamp, they carve it into that. They are then able to put the paint on it, press it several times, and stamp several papers, and it makes it so you can reproduce it. If he were to paint this, can you reproduce a painting back then? No, you can't do that. So you need something that you can stamp. Now, this is by Paul Revere, who is not actually famous for what you know him for. He doesn't become famous for that until the 1800s, and we'll talk about that later. But Paul Revere is going to make this engraving. Now, part of your homework was to find evidence of things that you're noticing in this picture. So who can tell me some of the things that they noticed that are in this picture?
The Americans?
Left side, the Patriots.
The Patriots, yeah, they're like helpless, they don't have any weapons, and they were just kind of like attacked without any reason.
Okay, yeah, so they're completely unarmed. Half of them have their heads chopped off, or this guy, his whole head's gone. Okay, so all these people completely helpless.
On the British side, the guy that's like leading the soldiers is like saying fire, but in their side, they said that he never said.
They never ordered it, right? So in this side, you can see that the British general is actually going to be ordering their troops in a very organized fashion. As we know, according to the British soldiers have started doing that without any provocation. Is that what you were going to say? Okay, go ahead.
All of the British soldiers look like angry or even like vindictive, and some of them are even smiling about it. And all the colonists, their faces just look miserable.
Yeah, they're super happy to be killing people, right?
Yeah.
By the way, does it look like 4 people are going to die in this? No. Yeah, only 4 died. In fact, like one of them actually died from something falling on top of him, not even a shot. Okay, what else? There was all these hands earlier. Okay, so it's in front of a church, which if you actually go to Boston, by the way, they actually have a thing where you can see where this is located. It looks like a giant square. It's actually about a third of this room is where this actual massacre occurred.
Is that the Old North Church?
Yes. Well, no. Sorry, I am wrong. Old North Church is going to be Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. This church is called, I believe it's Boston City Hall, but it was actually originally a church that was also a city hall at the same time. Old North Church is going to be where the one if by land, two if by sea. Yeah.
The sign on the back says Butcher's Hall.
Yeah, did you guys notice that right up here? Butcher's Hall. Who are the butchers in this picture? The redcoats, the Loyalists, right? Or, well, the British. Yeah.
Looks like it's night on the colonist side and day on the...
Exactly. Notice in the top left we have a moon. And yet on the right it's completely daytime. This massacre occurred in the daytime, right? So all of this is just propaganda. Really, one of the major reasons why the Boston Massacre, maybe if you want to highlight that on your paper, really why it was so effective was propaganda. People really did feel like we had been absolutely massacred. Thousands of people are dying of blood, when the reality was this Boston Massacre of the shooting was less than 2 minutes long, and not a lot of people died whatsoever. In fact, a lot of the British soldiers actually fled. A lot of them didn't stay there because they didn't want to get in trouble by the commander-in-chief that they have there. Now, from this, it's going to formulate into the Tea Act. So as punishment for this act, they are now going to tax tea. And there's always this question of, well, why don't you just stop drinking tea? It's not so simple back then. In a lot of European countries, tea drinking or coffee drinking is actually a tradition. So, for example, in England, at 3 o'clock on the dot, pretty much, everybody will leave their job and they will actually go and drink tea for an hour, and they'll actually work till 6 instead of 5 to make up for that hour. Or in Germany, at 3 o'clock, they have coffee and cake. And every day at 3 o'clock, all the businesses shut down, so everyone can go and drink coffee and cake. Here in modern day, I would say it's very similar to milk, because we drink milk so much in this country compared to other countries. But it becomes a modern staple. So imagine if your modern day staple that you're constantly consuming is going to be taxed. And this is going to cause the Boston Tea Party, which is your number 6. Number 6. Now, the reason the Boston Tea Party is so effective is simply because it made a statement. So basically what you had is you had a bunch of really angry people. They want to be able to protest the Tea Act. And so what they're going to do is they are going to dress up as Native Americans. They actually don't just throw the tea in the harbor. They're actually going to burn down several of the buildings in Boston. They set it on fire. But they're going to take approximately $3 million worth of tea and throw it into the harbor. Now, this was massive. A lot of the ships, by the way, had no real security. People were just able to do this. And the Boston Tea Party, because of this, has really become famous in pop culture. Yeah?
Was it $3 million their time?
In our equivalent.
Okay.
And if that was in their time, that would be almost $60 billion. Yeah, basically you can say it's like really a lot of stuff. It's kind of like if you heard of a couple of weeks ago, this guy stole a truck thinking it was Best Buy equipment. It ended up being like something like 10 million ramen noodle containers, but they still stole almost $600,000 worth of ramen noodles that day. So, yeah, crazy, right? And he was really angry, so he returned the truck, but the police were there because he returned the truck because he thought it was Best Buy equipment. Sorry. He got ramen noodles instead. But anyways, so this has become really famous in pop culture. And actually, back in 2015, TurboTax decided to create some commercials for this tea party. So we're going to watch the commercials. This is your little funny thing for the day of seeing, like, humor. Trying to make it funny for you guys. Okay, so here is TurboTax's Super Bowl commercial back in 2015.
But what if it were free to file your taxes? Like, free? Yes, you would pay nothing. You want to sing? No sing. Well, all right then.
put on your AP exam that had they filed their taxes for free, then there would be no Revolutionary War. Please don't do that. But Boston Tea Party really has become a really famous staple. You guys probably all heard about it before you even came into this class. It's one of those ideas of like the modern American way of going and doing a rebellion and getting what you want and being successful at it. Now, this brings us to a very important section, the Daughters of Liberty. This is a starred section. And next to this, I want you to write minority/women rights. That's my pen. Now, the reason why I say that is because the AP exam loves to emphasize minority rights. In fact, with the rewrite back in 2015, they will actually have very common trends of essays being about minorities. For example, 2 years ago, every single one of the LEQs was on women's rights through American history. So we can see that these are going to pop up a ton. So with this section, this is going to be the impact of women or the impact on the Revolutionary War on women during this time. So things that I want you to highlight in this section is I want you to highlight cult of domesticity and star that term. This is a term that you will actually hear every single unit in this class. It is a very important term. One sec. So let me explain what the cult of domesticity is. So we know that back then a woman's responsibility was you made babies, and then you made those babies to teach them how to grow up, have the men go off and work, have the women go and make more babies, and it continues on and on and on. Women were not supposed to go and read and write, because why do you need that if you're just going to make babies all the time? Women do not need an education. Why would you need an education? You're not going to go and have a job. So it's really the idea of the 1950s housewife of your job is to stay home and do nothing. Your job is to just be a part of the family. And so when we see images like this, of seeing families together with the mom typically teaching that family things, that's the idea of the cult of domesticity. And this really comes all the way up until now. The cult of domesticity is used even in modern day times to debate several different questions. It's used all throughout every time period. So this is one of those terms that by the end of the class of the year, you're going to say, yeah, I know the cult of domesticity. That's like the one thing I know in this class, because we're going to hear it so often. So in order to break away from that, the Daughters of Liberty, which are going to be a response to the Sons of Liberty, are going to be created in order to be able to be part of this revolution. It actually gives them some rights and allows them to break away from the cult of domesticity. So we all know, for example, you have somebody who's going to make the very first American flag, who is Betsy Ross. That's right. So women are now able to start creating these objects that kind of define the American culture. Now, following the creation of the Daughters of Liberty and the Boston Tea Party, people are going to start to get angry, and they're going to feel like we need to be able to move towards war and get rid of this taxation. And so we begin to see a massive increase in violence against tea collector or tax collectors and things like that. So I want to give you an example of this left-hand picture, which is one of the most famous of all the political cartoons in American history. So in this picture, on the left-hand side right here, okay, what is this depicting?
The
Boston Tea Party, right? You can see them throwing the tea into the lake, or the sea, excuse me. This guy right here who's being tarred and feathered, who is he probably? Tax collector, right? Those guys that we don't like very much. What are they pouring in his mouth? Tea. That's right. They're pouring a tea kettle right here into his mouth. They're making him swallow the hot tea. Over here we see the word liberty tree. So we have this liberty, but what is hanging from the liberty tree? A noose, right? Our liberty is being hung. We need to be able to push off against them in order to be able to gain our liberty back and not die as a country. Over on the right, this is the Bostonians in distress. So remember Boston, the seaport, things like that. In here, we have all the Bostonians being captured by the tax collectors. being poked and prodded with all these different taxes. The tree is also the liberty tree. The noose is actually the large box. And then over here we have cannons and we have army men prepared for war. So we know that we're moving into a definite war state here in the United States. Now we begin to have some revolts in the backcountry, mostly from people that are going to debate over the proclamation line. And then we're going to have our final events of the war. So we're going to move towards our final thing. So once we get to this section, we're going to take like a quick break and we'll come back. So we begin to meet together to figure out what are we going to do to solve these problems. These are called the Consonants of Congresses. There's 1 and 2. The first one's not as important as the second one. But they're going to meet together and say these are the problems we have and how might we fix it. Now this leads us to the Intolerable Acts, which are going to kind of be the final taxation before we begin to form our armies and be prepared for war. Now, these were intolerable simply because it wasn't that they were really special or different. It was just the final straw that's going to cause people to begin the war. Now, most of this was in punishment of the Boston Tea Party. We're going to punish them and punish the Bostonians by giving them all these taxes. But this just angers the colonists more. Now, I want to point out this left-hand picture. It says a new method of macaroni making. Macaroni, not mac and cheese. Okay? You've heard of the Yankee Doodle Dandy song. You've heard of stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Does anybody know what the term macaroni means?
Does it just mean fashionable?
It does. I thought you would know that, actually.
Why?
I don't know. You just seem like a fashionable guy. And it's actually used in drama a lot. In all seriousness, it's actually one of the most common drama terms is macaroni. I don't know why I thought you would do that, but cool. Now you know. Maybe I'm just a good consumer. So macaroni is actually a fashion statement. But the fashion statement at this point is going to be the extremely rich guys of the elite in the middle, or in England coming over to America. So if you've ever seen, for example, Pirates of the Caribbean, and you've seen the part of the movie where they're sitting there getting Elizabeth ready, and they have like 6 girls around her, and they have to put her in this whole contraption. That was how it was with the macaronis. They were the rich, upper class, typically straight over from England. Now these people typically on average would take 2.5 hours to get ready and 1 hour to get undressed. So imagine 3.5 hours of your day is designated to getting ready and going to bed. Now, basically this is the very pompous. They had, basically their wigs would come up several feet into the air. They wore very fancy frills. These were the people that people did not want to be like. They did not want to be the elite class. They wanted to be free Americans. So this idea of sticking a feather in his hat and calling it macaroni, it's saying we are now the elite class in America, not you anymore. Now, Battle of Lexington and Concord. This is important because you got to fix this because Miss Ray was really tired and made a big mistake. So, for the bullets for Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill, if you will switch those two, for some reason I messed up. My fault. So just switch those two. So we're going to start with Lexington and Concord. Now this is going to be the Old North Church. So what happens is Paul Revere, as well as his many different men, see the British coming. These were what were called the Minutemen, which were the people who were ready at a minute's notice. And they had made an agreement that if they saw the British coming, they were going to send out some sort of a signal. Now the signal was 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. That was in the Old North Church with the lanterns. Then Paul Revere dramatically goes to Lexington and Concord, is able to alert them and say, the British are coming, the British are coming. They all prepare, get their guns ready for this battle. Well, that's not precisely what happened. That's what we know from this poem that was written in 1860. Paul Revere was one of about 50 people. They had no idea where the British were going. They sent him out to several different forts. He just happened to be the one who got lucky and happened to be at the fort that the battle actually occurred at. We're actually going to talk later about why that poem was even written. If it wasn't for that poem, none of you would know who Paul Revere was. He would just be another guy from the American Revolution. But we will talk about Longfellow's poem later on. Now, at the actual battle, basically it's a standoff. One side you have the Americans, one side you have the British. They stare at each other for a couple of hours. Nobody really knows what to do. Somehow somebody shoots. And all of a sudden we start the American Revolution. That shot is called a shot that was heard around the world. We don't know who shot it. Could have been British, could have been American. We have no idea. Okay? Now, this is supposed to say Battle of Bunker Hill, but Battle of Bunker Hill becomes the first official battle of the war. With this battle, they are going to actually have 2 Bunker Hills. America's going to win, but it really shows how poorly we were as a army, and we're going to change later on with that. Now, African Americans, this is going to be also a key section. Go ahead and star this section. We're about to take a break, so give me 5 more minutes and then we'll take a break. In this section, if you will highlight the Somerset decision. Now, what happens with the Somerset if you will also highlight or underline effectively ended slavery in England? So what happens with the Somerset decision is that over in the Caribbean, there are several slaves that are beginning to be freed. They buy off their freedom. They go back to England to become citizens. When they arrive in England, they're told, you have no power or citizenship here. You are still a slave. They say, that's not fair to me. I bought my freedom. They sue in their version of a Supreme Court. Supreme Court says it is unconstitutional, according to their constitution, to even have slavery. And because of that, slavery now ends in England. Now, it doesn't end in any of its colonies. That's part of the reason why India still is going to have a similar version of slavery with Mahatma Gandhi and things like that. But in this case, slavery is going to end. So it actually is used as a war tactic. So next to the bullet, the second bullet, if you will star that, and right next to it, war tactic. Basically, what they're going to say is they're going to say that if you, as a slave, come and help fight for us, as the British Army, you will now be free after the war is over. And if England wins, slavery will be abolished in the territories. Now, it says 2 things. Number 1, African Americans begin to join the Continental Army in the British Army in massive amounts. And 2, it also is going to diminish the Southern economy almost to the point of collapse, where the Virginia and the plantations are going to begin to collapse. Now, we do send out one more attempt to be able to have peace. That's going to be known as the Olive Branch Petition. We send them it saying, basically, we will have peace as long as you give us rights. Parliament is going to reject that, and we're going to move towards war. Thomas Paine's Common Sense. This one's going to be a highlighted or starred term. And then star the second bullet. So common sense is basically going to say why we should revolt. Number 1, monarchy should have never been created. We should only have democracies. And then number 2 is that right now is the perfect time for independence based on what we're seeing in England. Now, common sense is going to be one of the major impacts of why we should go off and go to war. Second Continental Congress is going to be created. This is going to be where we sign the Declaration of Independence. Brings us to the Declaration of Independence, which is a starred term. Our declaration is going to officially declare that we are now at war. Now, the Declaration of Independence also is going to be a major document for all different revolutions around the world. Interesting thing about the Declaration, has anybody gone and seen it at the National Archives? Ooh, most amount of all the classes. Great. So if you ever go to D.C., I highly suggest that you go to National Archives and see the Declaration of Independence. If you don't know, that's what it looks like. Interesting facts, by the way, if you've ever seen National Treasure, it's totally not like that.
Isn't there a map on the back?
I heard, maybe, I don't know, if you use Benjamin Franklin's bifocals, maybe you'll find it. But as far as we know, there is no map on the back.
That's what I heard.
I know, bummer. But if you do want to know a secret thing that's actually on the map that you will never be able to see unless you go there, is somehow, they don't know who did it, they know it was after the Revolutionary War, somebody put their handprint on the Declaration of Independence. So in the lower left-hand corner is an entire handprint. They have no idea who it is or who caused that. They just know it was after the Revolutionary War. So maybe you're related to that famous person whose hand is on the Declaration.
Their left hand or their right hand?
It is the right hand, I believe it is. I had to double check. I have a picture. Well, I have a picture from the internet of it. If you don't know, at the National Archives, you are not allowed to have any photographs. You cannot photograph the Declaration. If you did, you broke the rules. Bad students. But the reason why is because this is actually considered one of the most crucial documents that they do not want to lose. It is under 8 inches of bulletproof glass. The container that it is in is specially controlled. It is at about 45 degrees at all times. And that 45 degrees, if it goes up or down a half a temperature, it will actually set off an alarm. That's what they did in the movie, but you wouldn't actually be able to steal it. But anyways, so that alarm system is to make sure that everything's okay. Now, why is that? If you go to the Declaration of Independence, you will actually discover it is very hard to read. Almost half of it is unreadable now. The reason why is because back then, nobody really knew that this document would matter to anybody. It was actually kept kind of like in an attic for like 10 years. And then they actually put it up on the wall of the White House right behind a window. And so what happened is for 150 years, it was sun-stained. And so now, about this section right here, you can't read it all because of that sun stain. And they finally were like, hey, we should maybe preserve it. The box itself is a $3 million box. So really expensive box to make sure that it's temperature regulated. Every couple of months, they will go down for refurbishment, where they will take it off and put it in a deep, dark cellar to try to keep and preserve all of that writing. They want to keep it out on display, but they don't want to destroy it. The box itself is also UV regulated, so no UV rays can actually get into the box. So it's really fancy, sciencey stuff.
So if you're going to steal the Declaration of Independence, you might as well just steal the box, too.
Things that I would not do. Number one, steal the Declaration of Independence. Reasons why, let's just go with, take everything else. First off, it's basically impossible. The movie shows where this kid, goes in and nobody's there and he just walks around. Okay, if you've been to the National Archives, it's like going to the Mona Lisa. I mean, there are lines of people and it's crowded around the Declaration. Also, the Bill of Rights are there, as well as the U.S. Constitution. Number two, the box alone is $3 million, which is more than just grand theft. That's mega grand theft. So, don't steal it.
Incredibly.
Please, don't steal it.
And then you'd be...
They have a lock system that's all weighted. So in theory, if any movement happens, that's why they say don't touch it. If it moves up or down at all, it will actually set off an alarm because of the weight system. Yeah.
Why do we steal the Declaration of Independence in that movie?
Okay, now we're not going into the plot of the movie. Because there's a map to a treasure. It's called National Treasure because of the map. Anyways.
It's because of the stone.
That's where he says, I'm going to steal the Declaration of Independence. I actually know some history teachers that show that movie. It's not historically accurate.
Really?
Oh, it's not historic. No. It's not historically accurate. So, anyways, okay, now we're getting to movie critics. Go watch it on your own time. It is PG, which means there are some violent action sequences. Please ask your parents' permission before watching. Okay. So we're going to take a quick 3-minute break. You can hop on your phones if you want, since some of you guys are really wiggly. Check your MySpace profiles to make sure you didn't get any messages. What is I really hope you're not asking me that.
I am.
It was the original Facebook. It was way cooler. You could put music on your MySpace. You had your top 8 friends you had to choose, so really people knew if they liked you or not.
People even use Facebook?
People do use Facebook. Old people like me use Facebook.
I use Facebook.
Your guys' number one social media is Instagram, though. Yeah. So this is your 2 minutes of stretching. I'm going to turn on the lights since most of you are falling asleep. Facebook is not just for old people, I promise you. If it wasn't for Facebook, how would my mom know what I'm doing with my life? She always said, every week, she's like, can you post more so I know what you're doing? Yeah. It's not kind of sad. She loves me. She always is the first one to like my photos. Get your wiggles out a little bit, and then we're going to finish the war.
Easy, dude.
I know lecture days are hard. I get that.
Every day is lecture day.
Not every day. Usually we have activities in between called funtivities.
They're called funtivities?
Yeah, they're fun activities. Every activity is a funtivity in this class. No, that's called funtivities.
I thought you guys knew earlier.
Oh, never mind.
1 minute warning on your wiggle time.
I don't think I can do this. That was 44 seconds.
Well,
Let's see it.
the problem is that we're a little behind, and I want you guys to see an SAQ.
We're always behind.
I know, but you have like a quiz, you know?
Behind on that too.
No, it can't be behind on the quiz. What? Oh, that's a good idea. Only have this class postponed.
Just, what is the higher
I think you might as well send a copy of the test home with all your other classes.
I might as well.
I like this color.
Okay, coming back together. I want to make sure we have enough time to practice for the test. Did you already have time to pull up a video?
What?
That was quick. You like pulled up a video and everything?
Of National Treasure?
Is it National Treasure?
No, of course not.
Did you watch the whole episode? Like the whole thing? I think it's on Netflix.
It's really good. It's a great movie.
It's National Treasure 2 on Netflix, though. That's the real question.
Wait, is National Treasure 2?
Yes?
What?
No, National Treasure 2, they kidnapped the president. Or the vice president, one of the two.
I might do
But there
that.
really are.
At Mount Vernon.
I think Mike Pence needs a little.
There really is, but most of them were for slave work.
Yeah, they're really actually not very long.
But, for the record, a little upset at Disney because National Treasure 2, ends in a cliffhanger, right? They're like, did you read page 63 or whatever? But then they just announced 2 months ago that they're never going to make another National Treasure 3. So how do we know what was on that page? We don't. It could solve all of our problems. The immigration policy problems, our national debt problems could all be solved in this movie, but they're not going to make it.
This is totally like Donald Trump.
No. No. Okay, let's finish the war. Hey, listen. Again, I want to show you examples of what you might see on the quiz so you're not surprised. Okay? Because not all surprises are positive surprises. Okay. Okay, you had your wiggle time. Okay. Articles of Confederation, you are going to need to star this term. This is a term that we will actually bring up with after the quiz. It is actually our very first government system. Except it was a total failure and it was absolutely awful. Don't forget, cell phone time and wiggle time was over. So, no, I just decided to say that randomly. Never know. Okay. Anyways, so the Articles of Confederation are going to be our very first government system. They were a complete failure, but I'm introducing it now because it actually began right after the Declaration of Independence. And, okay. So now we're going to head into what was George Washington's army like. So this is going to be a starred section. And what I want you to do is you're going to see where it says contained Continental Army and local militias, and then it says British troops. In between the word militias and British troops, write versus. You need to know the difference between the British troops and the American troops. Now, the reality was that the British troops were very good. They were well trained. They were paid. They typically went to 2 years of training before they went and fought. The American army was not that. They were actually what is called a local militia. So if you don't know what a local militia is, so a militia is actually a local group that pretty much train themselves as an army in case they need to be a backup for the U.S. Army. So these groups will actually go into small, little cities, and they will actually go and train. So they'll have army drills and things like that to make sure that they are ready in case they ever are needed. That's what happens here. It was a bunch of guys who have been trained at home to make sure that they were ready in case of an impending issue. Yeah?
Aren't they mostly sovereign citizens nowadays?
We will actually talk about sovereign citizens when we get to the Articles of Confederation. They're actually different because the sovereign citizens actually go off of and believe that the Articles of Confederation is the law of the land, not the Constitution. And we will talk about that when we get to the Articles, because they actually will use the Articles of Confederation as a basis. Local militias are typically in extremely Republican states in the backcountry. So North Idaho, Kentucky, Texas, in particular Northern Texas. Southern Texas isn't as many militias. But these militias are still legal. So if you want to join one, there are some in Utah. You can't join though until you're 21.
Can we make our own?
I mean, I am not going to suggest anything to you. But what I will tell you is that if you want to form a militia or join a militia, it is heavily regulated. They have to know who's in the militia, where you're practicing. Because, for example, we can't just be like, hey, let's be a militia, let's all go grab our guns and go practice out at the Skylines football field. Right? Do you see why that might be a problem? So, I could tell you right now it's going to be a problem.
I think that's a good idea.
No. Miss Ray did not come up with that idea.
Wait, why is that a bad idea? Let's start the East Milton.
Do you want a bunch of people walking around with like guns and rifles and shooting at each other, practicing on the football field? No. Okay. Listen. Most of these, so you're actually required to practice on private land. It also cannot be seen from any public roadways. The major reason is safety. A lot of these guys are going out after work and practicing these army drills. They don't want them to get shot. They can also cause a ton of fear. So like I'm from Idaho, so I'm most used to the militias in Idaho. Northern Idaho has a couple of things. It is not the same as Boise. So Northern Idaho, while it's very pretty, it is a lot of things. It has a ton of militias. So there are several local militia grounds. It also has the largest, one of the largest neo-Nazi groups in the nation. There's a ton of, there's like this line. There's the good part of Coeur d'Alene, which is like the tourist side that everybody goes to. And then you pass this line, and when you go past that line is when you get inundated with racism, and you get inundated with a lot of things. And, yes. But it's a lot of things. It's a very interesting part of the state. Please do not go and visit that side, because you will be very shocked, because it'll be a whole different America to you. It was to me. Yeah.
Isn't it bad where all the famous ones are from?
What?
Isn't it bad where the famous ones are from, like the ones who took over the American?
Well, so those were, I'd say that there's more famous ones. I would say they're the first militia to actually make it to the news for something big. So what he's talking about is the Bundy Ranch. So what happens is basically these guys, the federal government took over their ranching lands and made them federal lands instead of state lands. They decided to say that we now as a local militia can bear arms against our government because you're violating our rights. And it became a large standoff for several months. Eventually the standoff ended. They were arrested and charged. The ones in Nevada, some of them were convicted, some of them weren't. The big one that happened in Nevada, Oregon last year, is they went to what's called the BLM, that's the Bureau of Land Management. It was the same situation. They actually took it over for a month, so they took over the building and held it hostage for a month. No people were inside, but they did hold the building hostage. All those people, well, it's just a lot of points. It's not the first time it's happened. The idea is, it's not necessarily taking the building hostage, it's a standoff. And so if you think of like the Iranian hostage crisis, that was a standoff that lasted for 344 days. And that was 344 days of having 15 American hostages in Iran. And so in this situation, they got their point across, they got arrested, but the shocker of that one is they were all acquitted. They were all found not guilty of taking that. They said that they were in their constitutional rights as a militia. That is going into a lot of current events, though, that we really don't have a ton of time for. But other things that happen. So if you ever see anybody that is in blue, that is going to be George Washington's army. Now we know that the American Revolution is also going to cause a lot of very famous things that really invoke the patriotism in America. For example, this painting is called the
Crossing of the Delaware.
Crossing of the Delaware. There's a reason you all know it. It's because the famous painting during this time. Was the crossing of the Delaware the most crucial moment in the war? No. But it was painted, and so now it's famous. In fact, so famous that they make cute little parodies all about the crossing of the Delaware. Again, one of those true American spirits, things like that are going to be formed.
And it was on Christmas.
And it was on Christmas, but that's not, yeah. It's famous for the picture. Now, where it says failure on your sheet, you need to star that. Shh. Guys. So failure, you need to star this. So the failure is going to be Valley Forge. Now, what happens with Valley Forge is that basically we were very ill-equipped. We did not have the money to pay for the army. We did not have the ability to be successful. So what's going to happen is that they are going to basically bed down for winter, which is very common. Most fighting did not happen in winter because it was too cold and mucky. And so they bedded down for the winter, but they had no coats. They had no winter shoes. They had no food except crackers. And these guys pretty much starved to death. About 1/3 of the people at Valley Forge died. Most of them from frostbite or starvation. We're lucky we didn't lose half, or we probably would have had to surrender the war because we wouldn't have even had an army to be able to fight. Now, also this picture, though, or this event, also becomes famous for, again, a famous picture. Some of you might have seen this one. It's in a lot of church buildings around, also the Utah Capitol. It's George Washington praying at Valley Forge for relief from God so that his people can survive. Importance of France or Spain, if you'll go ahead and star this one as well. So, what's going to happen with... Somebody's humming. Okay. So, with France or Spain, basically these two, they feel like they're going to get more money and more success with America than England. So they both agree to recognize the United States, and they also agree to help them financially and militarily. If it had been for France or Spain, we probably would have lost the war because we wouldn't have the ability to fund it. Yeah.
What does recognizing matter about that?
Actually, that's a big deal right now, too. So when you recognize a country, that's a huge deal because you accept that their revolution is just. A fantastic example of this is Taiwan. So if you look at Megamap, Taiwan is right up here, this area. Okay? So Taiwan, if you don't know, Taiwan actually was originally part of China. It rebelled back in 1950-ish, and it ended up becoming its own country. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is that we are one of only 3 countries in the world to recognize Taiwan. It's part of the reason why missionaries are able to go to Taiwan on their missions. Most countries do not recognize Taiwan. They recognize it as what's called the rebellious state of China, which means that they are in a continuous rebellious state, that they've never been recognized as a country. Now, other countries, though, when they're recognized, they officially recognize them as a country. A fantastic example of that is this actually happened when I was in high school, in 9th grade. Right about here, there's a country that used to be called Yugoslavia. In fact, I think it's on this map still because a lot of our maps are still different. So with Yugoslavia used to be a country. They had a rebellion. They were at this weird tipping point. The United States, as well as most of the UN countries, recognized Yugoslavia as a state. And the original country that it was part of ended up separating it and saying, you can now become your own country. Yugoslavia was dissolved. It splits into 2 countries. And we now have 2 new countries in Europe. And so recognizing a country is actually a huge, important political step that could happen. So, for example, all the time they talk about Cuba splitting in 2 or Brazil splitting in 2, whatever it could be. If we recognize that as a country, that's a big deal. So, for example, California, if you don't know, California originally on the ballot this year, they just took it off, had a resolution to split California into 5 separate states. And then, yeah, this happens every 4 years, though. But the really big one was in response to a certain person's election, is that Los Angeles, that state, would become its own country and separate from the United States. So...
Wait, because of whose election?
Donald Trump. So, the big thing, though, okay, listen. Now, that's not going to happen. They already took it off the ballot. But let's pretend they all of a sudden revolt and say we're a country, and we're like, no, you're not. You're Los Angeles. If, let's say, China or Russia or any of these other countries say, actually, we do believe California has a state, they're going to become their own country, that's a huge political move, because typically they will go to defend that little baby country rather than defend the original country if they officially recognize it. Yeah.
It matters more if on the protectorate, right?
What?
It matters more if on the UN, right?
Yeah. Which one?
The UN protectorate, if they're recognizing the country.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I got really confused what you said at the beginning. Yeah, so the UN typically will all vote on the same. The only issue is in the UN, you have Russia. And that's the problem. Because Russia is one of the 5, so according to the UN, and we'll talk about this later, there are 5 nations that must vote yes to any decisions the UN makes. Those countries are the United States, Russia, England, France, and China. All those countries must vote yes on a topic. 4 of them always do. The only one that overholds out is going to be Russia. It's part of the reason why Ukraine is not an accepted state according to the UN, because Russia recognizes Ukraine as Russia. And they will not vote it ever as a state. It's a rebellious state of Russia. Okay, anyways, so France or Spain are going to recognize them. However, the thought was that if they recognize them as a country, that would be beneficial to them. France wanted us to be able to help France in their impending revolution that they could tell was about to happen. We didn't. That's why France hates us. And then Spain thought, hey, if we do this, you won't take our colonies away. And then guess what we did? We took all their colonies away. So really, this ends up being bad in the long run for them, but because we got whatever we wanted. All right. Got to hurry along because we are behind because we get distracted in this class. Okay. Negative effects on the Loyalists. Pretty much if you were a Loyalist at this point, your house is being burned down, you were taken by a mob and never came back. These Loyalists were treated like complete and total trash simply because they were Loyalists. Most of them moved back to England before the war ends so that they can be able to have a life in England. Now, women's support for Washington's army, if you'll go ahead and star this. Again, this is another part of your minority rights. Women's support for the war. Somebody have the time real quick.
It's like
12:23. Okay. So, women's support for the war, it's going to be that minority rights. So, basically what's going to happen is these women are now going to be donating things to the war. I'll get the clock soon, I promise. I just keep forgetting to go to Walmart. So, they're going to give support for the war monetarily. They're going to create clothing for other people. But kind of one of the most famous examples of the person who's going to help are the people on the battlefield, such as the famous Molly Pitcher. So Molly Pitcher, her original job was in the U.S. Army. Her job was to bring water back and forth to the soldiers in these pitchers. Well, one day she's walking the pitcher up to the battlefield, and she realizes all the guys are dead in the U.S. Army. Awesome. And so she gets frustrated, and she says, you know what, I bet I could do it better than them. She goes up to the cannon, busts out the cannon, and kills 300 soldiers in 4 hours. So she really becomes an idea of, yes, women can do something. They don't just have to sit at home. If she had sat at home and just cared for the children, I don't know, we could have lost the war. That was the idea. Yeah. We could be British right now. Who knows? So, final steps of the war. Kind of the last things as we begin to move towards war. The armistice is going to be signed at Yorktown. If you want to be able to write next to Yorktown of why they surrendered, next to Yorktown, I would just put England got tired. And that's not what I'm saying. This is just in layman's terms. I can make it a lot more fancy and frilly. The reason we say England got tired is a couple things. First off, England at this point owns about a quarter of the world. Okay? They have other people to deal with. It's kind of to that point where it's like, you're just annoying me. I would much rather go and deal with something that isn't going to give me trouble. So, for example, when they do all these statistics of, like, robberies, right? They'll say if you're in a large group, if you're in daylight, if you're in a busy place, you're not going to get robbed because they don't want to deal with all the problems. That's kind of what this situation here. They don't want to deal with these problems. They're making a ton more money in India than in America. It's part of the reason why when India does their revolt, they're going to really fight against that because they actually can make money in India. But regardless, though, we are going to end the war at the Treaty of Paris. Now, one thing to note about the Treaty of Paris, there is approximately 120 treaties of Paris. There's a lot. in American history. If you ever need a go-to that you don't know what it is, just say the Treaty of Paris. 9 out of 10 times you're probably right. There's only a couple times that you'll probably be wrong. They've signed almost all the treaties for all of our wars and conflicts in Paris.
Why?
Why? Because at the time Paris was neutral. It's not until World War I that Paris no longer is a neutral state or in part of a neutral country. Oh, they're being really loud. Yes?
Can we sign in Vienna now?
Well, actually, most of our treaties are signed at UN headquarters, which is in New York. The reality is, though, to be 100% honest, we haven't really signed a treaty since Vietnam. We don't sign treaties anymore. We usually just end a conflict, which is usually through the president ending that conflict. So Obama has officially ended our conflict in our war in Afghanistan and Iraq. That ends it. We don't sign treaties anymore. It's just things have changed. Hey, this is what I need you to do. Okay? With our little bit of time that we have left, I was going to have you use this paper, so if you put this paper away, grab it back out. On the bottom, you'll see that there is a bunch of space at the bottom of your paper. We are going to do some practice questions as if this was a quiz, and we're going to see how well you guys do. Whoever just said a bad word, this is a good thing for you. Do you not want practice questions? It wasn't you that said it. Okay. So I'm going to give you first off, in this space below, if you will number 1 through 6, we're going to have 6 questions.
Are they like multiple choice?
They are multiple choice. So you'll just need to be able to have enough space to write A, B, C, or D. There's no E on the AP exam. They only go through D. Okay. All right, listen. So you have sentence for practice questions. So we're going to do 2 sets. So first off, on the right-hand side, you will see the stimulus. So it's going to be a source of some kind that you need to observe. Then on the left are going to be the questions, especially for the back half. It's harder to see, so I'm going to read them off to you. The goal here is if you get 6 out of 6, you are highly likely to at least get a perfect score on the Revolutionary War section of your quiz. If you get less than, especially like a 4 or less, you need to study. Okay. So, question number 1. So we have this thing on the right, some sort of a map. We can tell that one side says boundary 1754. The right side says boundary 1763. I don't know, maybe something happened around that time. I don't know. Let's ask the questions, and then we'll see if the map solves those problems. So, number 1, the shift in the colonial territories most likely occurred due to which of the following events? Is it A, the Revolutionary War, B, the Stono, S-T-O-N-O, Rebellion, C, the 7 Years' War, or D, the Pueblo Revolt? So we know, picture on the right, there's some sort of change in territory. 1754 to 1763. Okay, number 2. One of the causes of the above event involved conflict over which of the following areas? Is it A, the Ohio River Valley, B, New York, C, Canada, or D, Florida? It's a little bit harder. This was the most missed one out of all 6. And then number 3, an almost immediate effect of the above-mentioned events includes A, the slaughter of the Pueblo Indians, B, an increase in taxation in the colonies, C, the banning of settlement in Florida and Canada, or D, Native Americans began involvement in colonial politics. So write down your answers. Now what we'll do is A is going to be a 1 finger, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4. So when we go through each one, you're going to put your fingers up of which one you think it is, okay? So for number 1, which event? Is it A, B, C, or D? Put your fingers up. Confidence. Yay! It is C, 3, 7 Years' War. How we know this? 1763 is the creation of what?
The proclamation line.
Proclamation line. It actually says it right here, Proclamation line 1763. Okay. Number 2. This conflict, so the conflict of the French and Indian War, was caused over A, B, C, or D. Put your fingers up, put your fingers up. A, Ohio River Valley. Whoop, whoop. Okay, I guess I'm the only one excited. Alright, number 3. An almost immediate effect of the above mentioned events involve A, B, C, or D. This one's also kind of harder. It is B, increase in taxation. Now, how you know this? The banning of settlement in Florida and Canada, which is a common one that people put, that was not what the proclamation line was. The proclamation line was west of the Appalachian Mountains. Okay? Really quick. Time? 33. Okay. So, instead, actually we'll do this real quick. Okay. On the right, this is the certified that the bearer hereof, Romeo Smith, is a free man and had served 3 years in the Army of the United States of America. Any person attempting to circumvent or trepan him as a slave, which means take as a slave, will incur a severe. I'm sorry, it's really late. Will incur the severest penalty of the law and the indignation of heaven. And then it explains that it was given at West Point. Okay. So, number 1, the person referred to in the quote to the right most likely gained his freedom by A, running away from his slave masters, B, paying off his debts, C, fighting in the army, or D, filing a lawsuit. Some of your faces right now are very funny. I'm sorry. Number 2, the British Army targeted the recruitment of those mentioned in the passage in order to A, create plantations in the Caribbean colonies, B, control the tea trade across the world, C, destroy the southern economy, or D, have better trained soldiers.
The British Army targeted them?
The British Army. And then 3, women were also able to change their status by breaking away from which of the following? A, cult of domesticity, B, the Daughters of Liberty, C, the Ladies Association, or D, Republicanism. Okay, so for the first one, so that's like question 4. A, B, C, or D? It is C, fighting for the army. It even says that, served 3 years in the army. 2, the British Army targeted the recruitment in order to A, B, C, or D? It is 3, C, destroy the southern economy. And last one, women were also able to change their status by breaking away from which of the following? A, B, C, or D? Easy. A, cult of domesticity. If you got at least a 5 out of 6, you are on your way to doing a good job. Okay, really quickly, listen. Hey, stop. Freeze tag. Okay. Really quick, this is what... Hey, if you want to know how to do an SAQ real quick, this is what a similar SAQ would be like on the exam. So it'll have A, B, and C. Explain one cause of the American Revolution, one additional cause, and one effect. Your job is to find a key term, whether in these first 2, it could be proclamation line of 1763, taxation. Explain how it answers the question. So this is one example of what you might see on the exam. Okay? Or quiz. All right. Don't forget to study for the quiz. No homework except studying.